What's up everybody, the Muscle Geek myself is back with another seminar all about if you can still grow muscle during lockdown. Let's get straight into it. So let's see. Turns out, yes you can. You can still grow muscle during lockdown. In this seminar, I will be taking you through the steps of how you can make sure you still grow muscle during this lockdown. So how do you actually build muscle? Well, you can build muscle three ways. The first way, mechanical tension. The second way, metabolic stress. The third way, exercise-induced muscle damage. Mechanical tension is a primary driving force in hypertrophic response to regimented resistance training. What do I mean by that? Simply, it is the main driving force in inducing muscle growth from resistance training. It can happen through numerous signaling pathways. This is from things like MAPK and so on. It is mainly achieved by using a heavy load and performing exercises through a full range of motion for a period of time. The next stage, metabolic stress, is usually achieved through exercise which induces the accumulation of metabolites, so things like lactate. If you're unsure what this means, you know that burning sensation you get when you do quite a few reps? That. The third one, there is some questions within the research as to whether this actually acts as a driver for hypertrophy, but we're going to put it in here anyway. Exercise-induced muscle damage usually occurs when there is a lot of inflammation around the muscle. So eccentric actions are the things that can cause this. So the lengthening of a bicep curl or going down in a squat, that kind of thing. So we know what the driving force for hypertrophy is. Now, anything that we want to improve needs to be overloaded in some way. And it needs to be progressive. So during lockdown, implementing progressive overload is very important. Overload, it has been defined as pushing a system, in this case your muscles, into the threshold beyond which it is challenged enough to meaningfully adapt. In our case, this means training hard enough to cause muscle growth. Relatively simple. There are three main ways you can implement progressive overload. One is volume, which is usually termed of how many sets you do per muscle group per week. The second way that you can implement progressive overload is by what's called your proximity to failure. For this particular seminar, we are going to use reps in reserve, or RIR. Ideally, when you are training, you will be roughly around 4 to 0 reps in reserve. So 0 reps in reserve will mean muscular failure. You couldn't do another rep. 4 would mean you have 4 reps left in the tank. 3 is 3 reps, 2 reps, 1 rep, so on. The final way is your intensity. That is how hard you train. Ideally, you would go no lower than 30% of your 1 rep max. Anything lower than this usually is termed junk volume. There is a lot more fatigue taken within the muscle and within the body than stimulus given to cause muscle growth. And again, we have this proximity to failure, 4 to 0 reps in reserve. What matters most is maintaining good technique throughout each progressive overload method. If you're severely injured, it can be very hard to train. So make sure you have really good technique throughout the whole time you are training. Okay, so a way to manipulate volume is to increase the amount of working sets you do per muscle group per week or per session. Training volume itself has been shown to be the primary driver for muscular hypertrophy. It is the primary driver for causing muscle growth. It also follows a upside down U-shaped curve. What I mean by that is, if you keep continuing to increase your sets to a point, you will get more growth. This here would be your MRV. This is your maximum recoverable volume. This is how much your body can do and still recover from it. Any more and you're going to get diminishing results. This was a creation by Dr. Mike Israetel and Dr. James Hoffman, and it helps provide us some context as to how we can progress sets throughout the mesocycle. As muscular hypertrophy has a dose response to training volume, what I mean by that is the more you do to a point, the better your results. The volume landmarks allow us to achieve a sufficient amount of volume per muscle group throughout each mesocycle. The terms that Mike Israetel and James Hoffman usually talk about is your MV, which is your maintenance volume. This is how much volume you need to do in order to maintain your current muscle mass. Your minimum effective volume, this is the minimum amount of work you can do in order to still receive results. But by definition, it is still minimal results. Then throughout the mesocycle, you start approaching your maximum recoverable volume. This is how much your body can maximally recover from. What this means is that we can gauge if we need to increase sets or decrease sets depending on how our body feels at that time or during that week or that mesocycle. So, for example, let's say you are training arms. You feel okay, the pump is great, the disruption that you're getting from training is still okay, still maintainable. You can increase a set, okay? Let's say you get to a point where you've increased the amount of training volume you do too much, that your body starts to get fatigued, you start to not want to train. The pump you're getting wasn't as great as the pump you got before. These are all symptoms that you are just going over your recovery capabilities. And that's what MRV does. It allows us to see where our threshold is to where we can perhaps manipulate the volume a bit more or a bit less to best suit us. So because training volume is the primary driver for muscular hypertrophy, this is great, because if you're at home during this lockdown period, you have a lot more free time, which enables you to do more sets, which enables you to put more work in. This will increase your training volume. All you need to think of is the markers that the body is telling you: your fatigue, your pump, the disruption you have during the set, the readiness you have to exercise again, those kind of things. Okay, so we spoke about sets, now we speak about reps. The research has said that a rep range between 5 and 30 reps are around the hypertrophy ball mark. Any more than 30 reps, the weight is usually too light. What this means is that there could be an accumulation of fatigue, which is far greater than the stimulus you are getting to cause muscle growth. The higher the rep range you do, the closer you need to go to muscular failure. So if you were doing a rep range of say 25 to 30 reps, because there will be possibly a lot of accumulative fatigue during that time, the closer to failure you go will make sure the stimulus is great as well. Any less than 5 reps is usually too heavy. Okay, what that means is there could be a lot of accumulated fatigue again than there would be for the stimulus that you're getting per each set. Also, the lower the rep range, the further away from muscle failure you can go. Usually, if you're doing a bench press, for example, doing a bench press till you fail, until you can't lift it up anymore, is probably not ideal. Same with a squat. If you're squatting and you go to muscular failure to the point where you can't stand back up again, probably not ideal. You could risk injury. So going to where you have 3 or 2 reps left in the tank is probably a good area to be on some exercises. On others, such as isolation movements, where you don't have that issue of safety, obviously there is an issue of safety with all exercises, but not as much, you could probably go towards the closer end of muscular failure, so the 1 to 0 rep range. Not rep range, sorry, reps in reserve. There are probably benefits to using rep ranges across the entire spectrum, so don't neglect lower or higher rep range work whilst you're training. For those who are training in lockdown and have minimal equipment, this is perfect, because this means that we could do reps of around 30 and still get good results from it. All we need to make sure is that we're getting close to muscular failure, to the point where our muscles can't do it anymore. Okay, so load, in other terms, weight. We have your lighter loads. This goes down the pathways of metabolic stress and helps with things with muscular endurance. With the lighter loads, obviously, you're able to do more reps. But remember, from what I said before, you can go up to 30 reps. You can go up to 5 to 30 reps is a good ballpark. You can go up to that high amount of reps and still get good gains. So don't be afraid of using those lighter loads. Also have heavier loads. This will incorporate more mechanical tension, and you will receive greater neural adaptations from this. What I mean by that is that your body gets used to lifting that particular weight, and in order for you to get stronger, it starts adapting the neural pathways in order for you to be able to lift heavier weights in the future. All in all, both cause muscular hypertrophy. So in this lockdown, if you have minimal equipment, there is still no excuse, because you can use the lighter loads and still grow, which is perfect. All that would mean would be that you would have to use the higher rep ranges in order to get the same amount of stimulus. One of the key things with training with lockdown is the limited amount of equipment. There's a few issues with having limited equipment. A few of these issues are grip. If you're doing things like a chin up, for example, and you haven't got the use of having a bar that has those grip handles on it, use something like wrist straps. What that will be able to do is it would allow you to make sure the muscle is the limiting factor and not your grip. The limiting factor is literally what is causing you to stop performing that exercise. Is it the muscle or is it something else? Another limiting factor that could be a potential issue would be balance. What I mean by this is, if you only have one dumbbell and you want to do a chest exercise, doing a single arm chest press, probably not that stable, but doing a push-up is far more stable. So balance won't be an issue. What would be the issue and what would cause the set to stop would be the muscles, which is exactly what we want. Obviously, there will need to be a crossover with the exercises you are doing, as you can't isolate a particular muscle anyway, not fully. So if you want to train your arms, other muscle groups within that area will be working also. But with the exercises we are performing, we can always bias them a bit more. What I mean by this is, say you have got very limited equipment, but you wanted to work on your triceps. Doing something like a close grip push-up or a dip, it will still incorporate your shoulders and your chest, but it will bias the triceps more. Studies have shown higher activation within the triceps with these particular exercises. Okay, so we've gone through training. We realized that yes, we can still train and we can still get good results during lockdown. What about the next thing? Nutrition. You need to make sure you are maintaining a surplus, a caloric surplus whilst you are massing. You need to make sure your protein targets are met consistently. Protein, as we know, is a building block for muscle. If you have very minimal protein going in, it's going to make it a lot harder for your body to build that muscle that you worked for. Be consistent with it. It's lockdown, which would mean that the routine that you had whilst you were out and working will be very different if you are at home now. But you still have to be consistent with it. Get yourself into a routine that will allow you to remain consistent. One thing that is worth mentioning is that there is an issue with NEAT. NEAT is what we call non-exercise activity thermogenesis. This is essentially the movement that we do during the day that doesn't involve our time exercising. So for those who work on a building site, it could be something like that. For those who work in an office, it's something like walking to and from the car or walking up and down stairs, and so on and so on. Any activity that we do throughout the day that isn't exercise based. Because we are in lockdown and because people will be at home not moving as much, calories and protein intake may need to be modified slightly. This is due to the fact that we aren't moving as much. If we aren't moving as much, the calories and the protein that we would need would be lower because your NEAT is not as high. You're not moving as much outside of the gym or outside of exercising. You know, you're moving to and from the kitchen or to and from your bedroom or to and from the front room or the lounge, whatever you want to call it. Because of this is going to have an effect of the fat that you could possibly gain during this time. If your calories are too high, far more higher than what your body would need to be in a positive, to have a positive influx of calories anyway, too much the body will store as fat. Whilst growing muscle, you will put on body fat. It's inevitable. You are putting in more calories than you're putting in. Some of that's going to go to growth, some of that's going to go to fat gain. What you need to make sure is you need to be mindful of the fat that you gain during this time. So it might be worth adjusting your calories to around half a pound to a pound a week, just to try to mitigate this, just to try to lower the amount of fat gain or slow it down slightly. All in all, the principles don't change. Okay, the principles for hypertrophy, and this is taken from Dr. Mike Israetel, Dr. James Hoffman, Dr. Melissa Davis, and IFBB Pro Jared Feather, from their latest Scientific Principles of Hypertrophy book, which is awesome and I fully recommend. To summarize them, yes, you can still build muscle during lockdown. So for those who think their progress is now halted, I've proved you wrong. It's great to be right sometimes. Incorporate progressive overload throughout the mesocycle through several means: load, sets, reps. Okay, so incorporate those progressive overload methods throughout the mesocycle. Training volume, as we have found out, is the key driver for building muscle. So pay attention to the volume throughout the mesocycle, throughout your training period. Is it increasing? Great. Is the feedback that you're getting from your body, is it still a good feedback in order for you to increase your volume? Or is it saying, no, let's hold it for a minute? Or is it saying even worse, no, I don't want to do any more volume? Okay, listen to your body. Really hone in with listening to your body. Use a wide rep range from 5 reps to 30 reps. 30 reps whilst incorporating pauses, so pausing at certain parts of the rep and slowing down the eccentric, so slowing down the negative portion. What these are going to do is going to give you a lot more ways of training and hitting that muscular failure section when you are going through the higher rep range. Okay, the heavier the load, the more reps you leave in reserve, and the other way around. Okay, the lower the load, the less reps you can leave in reserve. So if you've only got 5 kilo dumbbells and you want to do a chest press, for example, doing a rep range of around, like you said, 20 to 30 reps will be fine. If it is still too light, you could use other methods such as pausing, like I said, during particular parts of the movement to make it harder, really slowing down that negative part of the movement to make it harder also. Ensure the muscle you are working is a limiting factor. So ensure if you are working your legs, that your quads are the limiting factor to that exercise. If you're working your arms are the limiting factor to that exercise, not your grip, not your balance, not any other thing. Maintain a caloric surplus and high protein during this time. This is so important whilst you are trying to build muscle. So important. And pay attention to that NEAT as well. If it's a case where you find out that you are gaining a bit too much during this time, just simply bring your calories back slightly, not much, slightly, just to mitigate any more fat accumulation during this time. If you enjoyed this seminar and you enjoyed listening to me ramble on, here are a few of my links on how to find me. Facebook, Instagram, my website, YouTube as well. Hope you guys enjoyed the seminar. See you soon.